I'm Laura Cox Kaplan. This is She Said, She Said. She Said went live at the 2018 FABTECH trade show at a breakfast for women in manufacturing. Our special guest was Veronica Braker, who is Vice President for Operations at BASF Corporation's Performance Materials Division in North America. Veronica is a thoughtful, authentic role model and on the front lines inspiring other women each and every day to pursue careers in engineering and manufacturing. Our thanks again to the women in manufacturing and FABTECH for including She Said in this year's conference and trade show.
Good morning, welcome to our annual Women of FABTECH breakfast. This is an excellent event, and we're excited to be a part of it and to bring together women who are here to see technology and innovation here at the FABTECH show. My name is Allison Graylis. I am president of Women in Manufacturing Association, and I also am vice president of the Precision Metal Forming Association. Just for some information, if you don't know Women in Manufacturing, we are the national trade association working year-round to support, promote, and inspire women in this industry and in manufacturing. On behalf of all of the organizations that I'm representing and then the other sponsors of the FABTECH trade show, FMA, SME, AWS, and CCAI, I'd like to welcome you all to this breakfast. I'm pleased to kick off the program by introducing Laura Cox Kaplan and Veronica Braker. Laura Cox Kaplan is the founder and host of the popular She Said podcast. Frustrated by the narrow way in which women's interests and political and civic engagement are often framed, as well as by the lack of women in senior positions in business and politics, Laura created the podcast as a platform to showcase uniquely diverse voices of inspiring women who are making a difference. Laura brings a unique perspective to conversations with a broad range of industry and thought leaders. This morning, Laura will be interviewing Veronica Braker. She serves as Vice President of Operations for BASF's Performance Materials Division in North America. Throughout her 25-year career, she's gained experience in process and project engineering, quality, supply chain, and operations leadership. She's a certified Six Sigma Black Belt and Master Black Belt with a deep understanding of operational excellence and a passion for improving the representation of women in manufacturing and technical roles. She also serves on the board of directors for Women in Manufacturing, and I've had a great pleasure of working with her for the past year.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We're so excited to be here this morning. Normally with the podcast, we are not in front of a live audience, so this is a special treat for me, and I hope it will be for you as well. My new friend, Veronica Braker, is here with us today, and she is a perfect example of why showcasing these women is so important. Veronica, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you.
So great to have you here. Let's start by talking a bit about how you got your start. What was it about manufacturing that really appealed to you?
You know, it was interesting. Early on, I grew up in St. Louis, and early on I went to all-girls Catholic college preparatory school. And at the time, you can imagine getting news from my mom that I was going to go to all-girls school. First of all, that wasn't going to be my first choice. But, it was really important to her to focus on education. My mom actually was one of the first female line operators for AT&T. So she was one of the first women to climb the telephone poles, right? And so that was one of the things that was important to her, that she wanted her daughters, I have a sister, both of us engineers, to really be part of that technical field and appreciate that. So I went to Rosati Kane High School in St. Louis. And I took the technical track because you could go accounting or you can go technical. And one of the missions of the school was really to introduce us to careers They focused particularly on careers that were less frequented by women. So we would have people from these different areas come in and talk to us and let us know what was going on. We'd have shadow days. We'd do externships. So I thought they did an excellent job of introducing us to roles that they thought that we could be effective in, that they would tell us right away. It wasn't a high percentage of women, but that was one of their missions, to get women into those roles. And so that was my first interest, right? I had great teachers, I had great exposure. And then as I went on to college, once again, I got exposed at a much higher level through internships and things like that. And I just decided I really enjoy making something, right? I really enjoy being challenged. I have a natural mind around problem solving. And I think women in general are multitaskers, and so that allows me to do that as well. And so that was really kind of what piqued my interest. So I think the early exposure to it, and just my interest in general. I like to tinker, and I love math, and all those things that seem to fit.
I love that the example of that your mom set was really what initially piqued your interest.
Huge.
And that's so important. Talk to our kids about what it is we're doing and what's meaningful to us and what we're passionate about.
Exactly. And so I have 5 kids of my own. And I know that's
you guys
always
hear
a
that?
surprise.
5. She's 5. Working mother of 5.
Working mother of 5. So I think that's important to say though as well, because a lot of times as I mentor and I go through and I see women, especially some of our younger talent, the concern is always, can I do it, and can I be a mom, and can I have a good career and be effective at both jobs? And I'm here to say you can. There's always a path. It's different. But, I have 5 kids and 3 daughters and two sons. My oldest is 27. My youngest is 16. Both girls on each end. And so as much as I can, I would expose them through Bring Your Child to Work Day. I try to get them into science type of curriculums within their school. That was always important. I don't know how, my husband's a chemical engineer as well, so we're both chemies, and so that had something to do with it, maybe negative on one side. Because my 2 oldest kids who are out of school, I don't have an engineer yet there. I have a college coach and a technical sales guy, but I'm happy to say I have a sophomore mechanical engineer. I have a freshman who's probably going to be pre-med biomedical, and then I have my 16-year-old who's a budding chemical engineer. So I will get an engineer out of one of those.
So what you're talking about really begs the question, and I think there's a lot of discussion about work-life balance and how you balance it all, but for a woman who's at the level that Veronica is in her career, to balance it with 5 kids in a dual career household, because your husband also is
Absolutely.
in a very big job as well, that is pretty unusual. So I think, give us some perspective on both how you've managed your career and what advice you would have for the audience as they think about this, especially for younger members of the audience who may be just embarking and thinking about getting married and having children and pursuing that path as well.
Okay, I would say, and it's so funny because people always say, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how I did it, but you did it. I wasn't one of those people. No, I didn't have nannies. It was important for me for our kids to have exposure to my husband and I. Where we could, we utilized family as well. But it came down to, I will say this, early out of school, I had these aspirations. At the time I wasn't married. Then I met my husband. I said, hey, I still have these aspirations too. And he was supportive of that. So that was one important thing. Choose your partner as well, because, they have to understand right away what they're getting into. There were times, where there was maybe not now. It was pace that I think was more important for me. There were times where I had to make moves or make jobs that were personal in nature. My husband and I would have the leading lagging discussion. And there were times that there were reasons that he was the leading career, and so we had to take the back seat, and there were times that was lagging. And so I think it took me a couple of years to mature and say, it's not that I can't have it all. I maybe can't have it all right now. So it was more around pace. And so
transparency, right?
Transparency.
You're having transparent conversations with your spouse, which can be sometimes difficult to have.
Absolutely. And it's also how you look at your career. It wasn't this hockey stick trajectory, right, that I think as 25 you start off wanting. It looked more like a spider web. I started focusing on what are the jobs and experiences that I can give myself, even if it's a lateral move. What are the things that I can do to add tools to my tool belt? How do I make myself a very diverse, rounded person and get this credibility to be able to lead a lot of different things? At some point, you're in your career and you're the jack of all trades, master of none. And then you start to hone in and start to become good at something and where your passion leads. Always keeping in balance in terms of, where my family fit. Get rid of the guilt too. One of the things I remember having this experience, and it was with my oldest daughter who was 27. I think at the time she was 9. And there was something going on at her school, and it was middle of the day kind of silly thing, right? And I just really could not make it work. She went to school and she came home and she goes, I had a talk with my teacher. I told her, look, my mom works for a living. And this, and so the pride in her voice and her taking up that subject with the school to show some sensitivity and be proud of the fact, yeah, my mom works, show my kids that they didn't miss a whole lot. And I felt like with all the moves, and we made quite a few moves, I look at my kids and they're so well-rounded, they're so resilient, they're so grateful for the experiences that they had. And the way we balanced that was that, when there was a day off, we always took family vacations, that we felt like their home was where my husband and I were. And so we became their base. And so it's important to deal with what's important, but also don't kill yourself for the things you can't control. Get rid of the guilt. Know that you're doing your best, and know that your kids can see that. I think sometimes we underestimate that. And then also another aha moment for me in my career was early on, once again, 20, 25, 26, 27, I was trying to keep up with my male counterparts, right? So if they could stay to 8 o'clock, I was going to stay to 8 o'clock. If they were going to take a last-minute trip, then I was going to take a last-minute trip. And I was absolutely killing myself. It just wasn't working. It was angst at home. It was angst with me because you want everything to be perfect. And finally, I was talking with a coach, actually, and it was around being honest with yourself. And so I thought, what's the worst thing could happen? And so I told my boss, I said, hey, look, I can take this trip, but I'm going to need about 3-4 days notice because I need to make arrangements for my children. And then I just decided, be honest with myself and go in, and I would have a much better experience on both sides. And it didn't kill me. I've been an executive in 2 companies now, large multinational companies, and I enjoy what I do. And that's where my joy came from, not the stress. So I think that's important.
So Veronica, we're seeing a lot of change in the industry. There's a couple different areas that I want to talk to you about. One is around personal growth and development. But before we get to that, talk a bit about, have been, and probably still are, I'm guessing, the only woman in the room at times. Maybe less so now, which is great because there's tremendous progress that's being made, but you're oftentimes the only woman, and my guess is probably the only woman of color.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Talk about what that's like, and what advice do you have for others who may find themselves in similar positions?
Yeah, so it goes back not so far from what we just talked about. It comes down to personal confidence. Knowing that I belong there was the first part about it. So not making excuses for it and not feeling uncomfortable, right? Because I don't think people can make you feel a certain way. And so I go in, I think I'm pretty good at what I do. Results and performance always matter to me. But also, I have to understand that just as uncomfortable sometimes as it is for me, it is also for them. And really in a larger regard. I was with a company, and I remember having to go on a trip, and it was all white males. And in the past, I was the first African-American or even female leader that they had at this level in their organization. And in the past, they had these twice-a-year meetings, and they would go to strip clubs and do things like that, And so I was, the first year I was there, there was just natural uncomfortableness around, oh, we used to do this, now we can't do it. And really what we tried to focus on is that what fun can we have that is something that I said, if your kids or spouse read about it in the newspaper, you won't be ashamed of it. And so hopefully I was teaching them to be better, credible professionals. I had to be comfortable with them. They needed to be comfortable with me. But it comes from the confidence, right? And it's not a cocky confidence. It's just go in with the mind of not trying to figure out what's wrong with it, what's right with it. And then at some point, I always convince myself this will be a non-issue, because there will be many of us sitting around the table, and this won't be an issue anymore, and I'm working towards that, right? So if you kind of begin with the end in mind, right? I'm there now, I'm the first. The first is always painful, but I'm doing it for a much bigger cause, and I have daughters, like I said. I look at a lot of people I mentor. I'm very passionate about young ladies who have this interest and trying to cultivate that as much as I can, and so with that might come some firsts that are a little tough. It's just signing up for it.
Yeah, this topic of confidence is a big one, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast. We've had Claire Shipman, who co-wrote an amazing book called The Confidence Code, which if you haven't read it, it's fantastic, especially for young women and girls. As you think about those knocks to your confidence as you're going through junior high school, that's really where that hit happens. So as you think about this notion of confidence, the parallel to that is self-doubt. Right? How do we deal with self-doubt when we encounter something? Maybe it's a setback, maybe it's an outright failure. How do you bounce back from that in order to keep your confidence high and to sustain that momentum for yourself?
And then one of the things we haven't gotten into, but mentoring is tremendous. And throughout my career, I've had a number of mentors, both formal and informal, and not all females. I go to the majority also for mentoring, because it's important to get their perspective. Art Harper, I remember, was one of my first male high-level mentors. And one of the things he told me is, it was a couple of pieces of advice I laugh at, but it's like, never let them see you sweat. The number behind that, what he said to me, he says, Veronica, you kill yourself because you think you have to be the smartest thing in the room. But guess what? They don't know the answer either. So have some confidence in knowing that no one is all-knowing. Other people have made these mistakes as well, but you can't let it show all the time, right? You can't, never let them see you sweat. You might make the mistake, own it, and walk in there with your head high, because you know that they've made those mistakes too. You may not be aware of them. So it was more around this whole idea of perfection and guilt. No one's perfect, right? Everybody's made those mistakes. It's what did you learn from them? It's reaching out to people who can in some ways help you survive them. Right? So I think as women, we're not as good as always building our wall of allegiance. We tend to fall back on what we know, and we're smart and we know it, and they're going to recognize us and know it's because we're the smartest. Where relationships matter in the workplace, and having a wall of allegiance and having people who can vouch for you and people who can help you recover through those things. So between the mentoring piece, between really building the relationships, and I call it my wall of allegiance, and that's what I always tell my mentees too. Who's your wall of allegiance? Do you know who your supporters are? Know who they are? And then those things help you survive just about anything.
So you've mentioned a number of different topics, the mentorship topic, which ultimately leads to getting great feedback so that you can continue to improve, but you also mentioned perfection, and perfection can be for women. Not every woman, but most women hold themselves to a really high standard, and that can often make it tough when somebody says to you, gosh, you could also do this, this, and this, and you go, wait, I thought I was like doing really great already. And it's that notion of perfection. How do you advise your teams, or how do you do this for yourself, keeping your perfection in check so that you can hear good feedback and keep growing? And how do you help your teams, particularly young women on your team, be open to that notion of feedback as a way of improving?
So I'm a high collaborator, especially I think as you go up to high levels in the organization, you just can't do it all. You will not have your hands around everything. So people and collaborating becomes very critical. And on my team, I have something that's called the challenge process, and I open it up because to me, if you have a bunch of bobbleheads sitting in a room, you're really probably not getting to the best answer. And so I challenge my team to challenge me all the time. And in fact, when they don't, I call them on the carpet. You have to open yourself up to that and create an environment in your workspace where that's okay. I think you're foolish if you think that you're perfect and things don't have there's not a better way of potentially doing something. So I'm trying to create a culture of inclusion. It's not just about diversity, but it's about inclusion. And inclusion really sits on everybody having a voice and people feeling comfortable. And quite honest, just like you said, I'm an African-American female sitting in a room, the one and only. If I don't know what that feels like, then I'm not sure who does. And so I draw on those experiences to make sure that I'm not becoming that. Feedback is a gift, and how you choose to use it is how you choose to use it. It's not always dead on. It maybe comes from different perspectives, but just take a look at it. I'm always constantly growing, a continuous learner. I just did a 360, right, with global colleagues, with peers, even people, not just the people I had the best relationship with. Because in some cases, I want to fix the relationship. And hearing the perspective and forcing people to write things down and think about it sometimes maybe gives it a little bit of truth. It's just being open to the feedback. I'm a believer of 360s. I grew up on them. I encourage them. The challenge process within your meetings. And there's a lot of literature around knowing if you have effective meetings and if you have an effective team, how many people are talking, for every good idea, how many ideas are being shot down. So I'm a constant learner, and effectiveness around your team is important, because that's the most important job I have right now, is developing people. That's what I do.
360s can be so incredibly, and are so incredibly valuable, but they can be so difficult because inevitably people will give you feedback in areas for improvement. So while 90% of what people say about you is positive, we can have a tendency as women to focus on the 10% that's not so positive. So what do you do with that 10% to keep yourself from spiraling and to instead focus on the bigger picture, focus on ways to improve, but not dwell on things that sometimes, these are things that we have a tendency as women to do to ourselves, is to focus on that 10% that's not just right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also am associated with the National Association of Manufacturers. They had a seminar that I found interesting, because I still I'm a continuous improvement person, so I'm always around what can I do better. But they had an interesting twist on the Strength Finder. You are actually more successful through studies when you focus on the things that you do well, not so much on the things that you're not good at, because we're never always going to be 100% good at anything. So instead of dwelling on what you don't do well, really try to go out and maximize the things that you're really good at. Because that tells you that you have a knack for that and you focus on those things. So my mindset has been the Strength Finder. Mm-hmm. And what am I good at? And how do I continue to excel at those things, right? And so it's a different take on things, but yeah, I'm guilty of that as well sometimes, right? But 90% of people say you were great at this, but that one person, and I try to find context. Oh, it's because I didn't agree with him at one time, and things like that. We could always rationalize, but I just say, you know what? I wish I was better at that, but you know what I'm good at? I'm good at these things. So that's what I focus on.
You have learned to articulate your value also very succinctly as you've worked your way up your career. And this can also be a real challenge sometimes. Oftentimes as women, we work incredibly hard. Our brains operate 30% at a capacity that's about 30% faster than the average man. That doesn't mean we're smarter necessarily. You can be your own judge of that. I'll leave it to you. But it does mean that you have more capacity to do things like ruminate or spiral, or if something doesn't go just right, you can sort of get tangled up in that. One of the things we also do oftentimes is put our heads down, work really hard, and hope that we will be noticed for the good work that we're doing. And sometimes that happens, but guess what? It doesn't happen all the time. So how do you advise your team? How have you learned to articulate the value that you provide to the organization and more broadly? And how do you help young women on your team do that as well, articulating your value?
If you haven't had a chance, there's a really great book that I actually just finished reading here a few months ago. And it's called How Women Rise. And in that book, it really talks about It's like a top 10 list on the things that we do as women that we think are the things that are the right things to do, but the perspective from the other side. And this was exactly one of them. I think it was like number 12 or something, about the work hard and keep my head down and they will notice. Once again, it's one is role modeling. Two is requiring my team to, I say you do one or two things, you be a mentor and you get a mentor. You have to have both. I believe in coaching as well, because I think we have blind spots. And I think sometimes we do need someone that is kind of who can step away from the situation and provide that feedback with real life examples on what we could do better. Role modeling is a big deal because you can say a lot of things, but people will always watch you, just like your children, right? You can tell them a lot of things, but they watch how you react in the situations that you deal with. So I support a lot of development programs through discussions with executive coaches, my own careers. We talk about these where we could be better, right? We develop programs around, and when they look at the programs that we develop around how to build your network, how to communicate with influence, how to build your wall of allegiance, how to recognize the unconscious biases in the room. These are all soft skills. These aren't things that you're learning as part of your degree or engineering or school. This is around somewhat workplace politics, but it's so important in how you also become successful, right? Because you don't just become successful because you're a great engineer. Great engineers teach, is what my teacher used to always tell me. So when people want to have a full career and they look forward to what it is that they would like to do and emulate how those people got to where they are. A lot of people get there not because they're smart, because they're great communicators, because they're great at influencing people, because people naturally like them because they're reliable in their communication and what they say they're going to do. So those things matter. And so understanding it's much broader than just the skill set you bring, but it's the other stuff too that you have to complement it with.
There is increased emphasis on this notion of reverse mentorship, where you not only mentor someone who's younger and maybe just getting their start, but then they in turn mentor you. Is that something that you guys are putting to use, and do you find that an effective strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I found most effective in the organization, like I said, once again, as my scope has grown, is that I have key leaders in my organization that, in addition to your normal staff meetings and operation reviews, but I have one-on-one discussions with them, and it's just that, right? It's the two of us, and we're sitting there and we're having a conversation and we're coaching each other. We're giving feedback openly. We're talking about concerns that we have. We're saying, hey, I don't agree with you because of this, and so that is a way of dialoguing, but also coaching and mentoring each other. And I think you have to be open to that. And when I look at the effectiveness of my organization as a result of those activities, it's phenomenal. I totally trust the people. We know we have a perspective, and I always do feel confident that they're going to make the right decision, that I don't have to be in a room, I don't have to be present, because we have such a deeper understanding of each other and expectations and value systems and things like that. So that's important.
How about building your network? That's kind of a different topic from mentorship, even though it can be directly related. But what advice do you have for both the value and sort of how do you go about that?
Right. So I think being at an event like this, these are important. And I tell my staff that, join these associations, attend these conferences, because I have to tell you, I've gotten so many great relationships out of these things, and you just never know when they'll say, wow, we really need, I go, you know what? I think I met a lady who she does this for this company, and let's reach out to her. And every single time, I can say 100% of the time, and maybe I'm just lucky, when I've reached out to these folks, I've always gotten a response back. And so being able to cultivate relationships not only for yourself, but for other people, to be able to connect the dots, right? That's a place of power too, right? Because there's another thing about where do you get your power, right? Part of it is knowledge, but part of it is being able to connect the dots and connect people. So you get it from conferences like this. You obviously get it from building a network in your work space, your community. is also a big deal. Get involved with something that is good branding for you, for your company, trying to help facilitate, whatever cause that you're passionate about. I'm passionate about STEM and women in technology, and so anything that I can do around that is part of my network. I know all sort of officials, from the chief fire guy to the chief of police, and those are important relationships too, a lot more than we would think. So networking is not just around all work, it's about the community around you, and who do you surround yourself with, and then how do you make those connections?
Well, we've talked a bit about the importance of making manufacturing attractive to broader population. The talent challenges face not just manufacturing, but really any and every industry. And women in particular are sort of the secret sauce there. But once you've recruited women into these roles, one of the other challenges can be retaining them. So let's talk about some effective strategies that you all are employing and that you see working well for retaining folks, and what happens in the career trajectory as you see it?
Probably about 4 years ago, we took a look at our numbers. We wanted to very much increase our female representation in a number of roles around leadership. And, so I'm a black belt by training. You guys get that, so I go to the data, right? I took a look at our demographics and I said, hey, look, I want to, what's my KPI, right? What is it I have to measure to know if I'm good or not? What do I benchmark? And so we really took our population and we split it into a couple of key areas. One was young, early, what we call early career. And then there was this middle career. And it was weird data that said, we had this retention issue in the 5 to 7 year range. But if you can get them past 10, then they would stay forever, effectively, right? And so I started thinking, so what is it around this early in career that we're falling down from a retention rate that ultimately you got a hole in your downstream pipeline, right? So you're never going to get there. And so in looking at that information, doing focus groups with that population, talking to people who had expertise external to just what we thought, talking to women who actually made it past that 10-year mark, like what was the magical part about that, looking at how we were prepping, because we had a lot of development early, programs through college and things like that. But somehow we were still falling down. And we started to look at where did we stack up against some of these key targets. One was around development, around mentorship, see it, be it, right? So for a lot of people, they didn't see a future with the company when they didn't see a lot of women in leadership levels. They're saying, well, somehow it's not really working. The funnel's kind of screwed up. And part of it was we weren't offering, first of all, we weren't offering exposure, because there actually are a lot of female leaders in our company. So we do have a organization now, Women in Leadership. So it's leaders not only in manufacturing, but controlling, HR, you name it, legal. And we get together as a women in leadership group, and we talk about what are we doing to support our constituency. Right? So how are we showing up? Are we showing up to mentor? Are we showing up as part of networking? Are we providing career guidance? Are we supporting programs, internal and external, to the company that are out there, whether part of Women in Manufacturing, we're part of that organization? Are we doing the things that we're talking? We're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk. And so offering those things to folks, and then being very intentional. And that's the other thing. I think we became better when we became intentional. Most companies are keeping their D&I metrics, right? They know what they are. But it's such a select group of people who have them, and no one really sees anything real happening in the organization as a result of that. But to go out intentionally and say, we need to improve our representation in our organization by 30%. Because we're lacking, and we currently sit at 14. That's a real number that people can get their head around. We start taking intentional actions to that, and so that sends a message also through the women in your organization that they're going to be supported. We started multiple programs around development where it wasn't just a one-day workshop seminar. You go in and, yeah, you get it, everybody's happy, you high five, you go home and nothing happens. But it's actually a 3-year development cycle with handshakes, leadership responsibility, advocacy, exposure to senior leaders and solving real business problems that we have. So we're walking them along this path. We're not just putting them in a class and saying go. So we're intentional about development. We know where our numbers are. We share them. We don't make excuses for what we're doing. And then we make sure that we have the programs that support that.
One topic we've not talked about is the role of men. And I want you to talk to us about what BASF is doing and what we can do as women to help men help us and help men help other women as well as we're rising up the ladder.
Okay, so we have been grappling with this program called He for She. So I actually am part of a steering committee for women in manufacturing internal, and I was very vocal about having a leader that be a male. I think that it was important for people in the corporation to see that a male was part of this, so I call it He for She. And I think it provides some credibility, but it was also a way of educating some of our males, because they would sit in a room with some of these females during our very candid discussions, and they would hear about some of the experiences. And and these guys have daughters; they're not bad people. And they would be absolutely appalled at some of the stories, and they would say, "This still happens, Veronica? It's 2017." Absolutely. So it was making it real for them, not just that we were complaining or we didn't know, or oh, they don't understand, they're not trying, but they were actually hearing real life stories, bringing them into supportive, bringing them into act as active mentors as part of this, but to support the steering of the programs. We went to our facilities and we looked at our infrastructure. Right, and it was almost like hidden figures, right, in some of our facilities where women were going miles to get to a restroom, or you go to a maintenance shop. I mean, these things were real, and there was just really no visibility to it. It was just real unconscious bias. It just wasn't something that they had experienced or seen or understood, and they just didn't understand the gravity of the situation. And so getting them involved at those levels, so we have a huge support, not only in the steering committee, the person who also leads it for our organization along with our chief diversity officer, but it's bringing them into what's really happening. And so we call it He for She, and we expect them to be mentors. We expect them to advocate for women. So take an ownership for how are you advocating? How are you making sure that they have the right level of exposure? There's a real ownership in that, because there's a pride for them to also be part of the success of watching women succeed and knowing that they're making a difference too. But it's just awareness.
Yeah.
Right?
Don't you think too, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion of Me Too and what that means, and many organizations are struggling with that. You and I had a pretty long conversation about this. But don't you think that notion of awareness, making people more aware and more sensitive to how things can be perceived, can help an organization get in front of issues like that?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that we haven't landed on, but we talked about it early on, and then now we see a need, right? You said with Me Too, we talked about sensitivity training and things like that, and people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. But we actually piloted it at a facility, and we got really, really good feedback from the operators, because we did it at the floor level, right? Because to me, that's still where we have an area where we seriously need to improve as well, not just at the leadership ranks, but also in the PMU ranks. And it was actually well received. Meaning we talked about situations. It was interactive, so it wasn't just people talking to you. There was videos, there was interviews from their own team members, and it was awareness. It was a huge awareness, but it was also being brave. I had a young lady come and talk to me, and she was in tears about a comment that was made that was insensitive, to be honest, and it was almost made to embarrass her, and it did. They were going to be having a women in business meeting, and and they're opening it up to anyone because they have these seminars. And she was with a couple of her male colleagues walking out, and a comment was made. He says, "Oh, you're going to attend the seminar now?" He goes, "No, I don't have time to go home and put my heels and my pearls on," or something to that extent. And she was right there, and she said, the thing that was most hurtful was that she works with these people every single day. They have lunch together, and she was just shocked by the comment. And I said, "So what did you do?" And she said, I didn't do anything. And I said, "But that was an opportunity for you to let them know what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. It didn't have to be aggressive. you could just say, wow, I'm really disappointed at that comment that you would say that. Or, you know, stop making it acceptable, because you've almost given him carte blanche that he's going to continue to make those kind of comments and those sorts of things. And yeah, I can go and I can deal with it, right, at a very strong level. But I also expect that you also draw a line in the sand about how you are going to be treated and what's acceptable and what's not. And you can do it in a very non-aggressive way. But until we start getting the confidence to do those sorts of things, we won't change it. So we can do it by policy, we can do those things, but at a real sense, you have to also establish what's acceptable. What are your boundaries? And take those opportunities. I said those are small teaching moments. I would have just said, wow, that's really disappointing you would say that. Why would you say, you know, put him on the spot. Make him explain that comment. Don't let him off so easy. Because guarantee you, other people like cringed at it and no one was comfortable in the situation, but no one said anything. I'm just encouraging them to say something. Right?
It certainly increases that awareness, right?
It
When
does.
it's brought to your attention, if you have a bit of a blind spot about that.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. In the very nicest way.
So we ask every guest on the podcast to leave us with a single piece of advice or a life hack. It can be a mantra. It can be something that you wish you had known when you were just starting out. You've given us a ton of amazing advice, but if you had to distill it down to one thing that kind of fits in one of those categories, what would yours be?
You know, I don't know, this is probably kind of silly, but, you know, I say I am the face of manufacturing, both present and future. And I want everyone in this room to believe that and to live it and to go out and your whole value system about where you operate. Yeah, I want to be great at my job, but I want to also be known for being a great development of people. I want people to want to work for me. I want people to have a good memory, and not only that I made the numbers, but that I made them feel something or I influenced them in some way. In a very basic way, I guess that's all I can say. I am the face of manufacturing. This is present and future.
Yeah, and do what's meaningful to you, right?
Exactly.
That has great meaning to you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our terrific guest, Veronica. Fantastic. Thank you so much. You can learn more about Veronica and also She Said, She Said from our website, and that's www.shesaidshesaidpodcast.com. You can also follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We cover all the basics. And we're just so delighted to have been with you today, Veronica. You are amazing. You are such a tribute to what's happening in manufacturing, and that is very exciting for me, and I think for all the folks in this room. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective.
No, thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.